Hey folks, Mr. Howard here, coming at you with the seventh chapter of The Picture of Dorian Gray. We read chapter 6 earlier, in which Lord Henry and Basil and Dorian were eating dinner at a fancy restaurant. That mostly served to bring Basil back into the fold, to have Dorian tell the story of his engagement, and to serve as a juxtaposition with the life that the Vanes, Sybil Vane and James Vane and the mom were living in comparison to the rich, life that our protagonist and all of his artistic friends are living. And so now they're off to the playhouse to watch the play, Romeo and Juliet, in which Sybil Vane is acting. And so it'll be the first introduction of Basil and Lord Henry to Sybil. And they'll see, theoretically, what Dorian sees in her. Just a disclaimer, the other side of my camera has a cat sitting there. So, if you hear noises, meows and stuff like that, that's Crosby. And he's just sitting there. So I heard me say his name, and I was looking at me. Anyway, chapter 7. I'm just going to read chapter 7. We'll do a little bit of commentary here and there, and then we'll call it a day. So chapter 7 is a really important chapter, by the way. Lots of themes start to come more clear. Maybe the initiating event, if you haven't thought that there is one yet, takes place. So here we go. Chapter 7. For some reason or other, the house was crowded that night, and the fat Jew manager who had met them at the door was beaming from ear to ear with an oily, tremulous smile. He escorted them to their box with a sort of pompous humility. That's an oxymoron. Waving his fat, jeweled hands and talking at the top of his voice. Dorian Gray loathed him even more than ever. He felt as if he had come to look for Miranda and had been met by Caliban. Lord Henry, upon the other hand, rather liked him, at least he declared he did, and insisted on shaking him by the hand and assuring him that he was proud to meet a man who had discovered a real genius and gone bankrupt over a poet. Hallward amused himself with watching the faces in the pit. The heat was terribly oppressive, and the huge sunlight flamed like a monstrous dahlia with petals of yellow fire. The youths in the gallery had taken off their coats and waistcoats and hung them over the side. They talked to each other across the theater and shared their oranges with the tawdry girls who sat beside them. Some women were laughing in the pit. Their voices were horribly shrill and discordant. The sound of the popping of corks came from the bar. So this is sort of setting the scene, but it's like a Shakespearean theater. It's like the Globe. There's a gallery. It's open. You can see the sun flaming like a monstrous dahlia. We got flower and, hell images going on as usual. When Lord Henry is present, I think that's interesting. Anyway, what a place to find one's divinity in, said Lord Henry. Yes, answered Dorian Gray. It was here that I found her, and she is divine beyond all living things. When she acts, you will forget everything. These common, rough people, with their coarse faces and brutal gestures, become quite different when she is on stage. They sit silently and watch her. They weep and laugh as she wills them to do. She makes them as responsive as a violin. Didn't Lord Henry use that very similarly when he was thinking about Dorian and how responsive he was to his manipulation? I think that's interesting. She spiritualizes them, and one feels that they are of the same flesh and blood as oneself. It's an interesting little phrase, but it harkens back to the idea of communion. This is a religious experience, watching Sybil act. I mean, she's his divinity. She spiritualizes them. You feel like they're all sharing flesh and blood. Maybe there's a communion behind that. The same flesh and blood as oneself? I hope not, exclaimed Lord Henry, who was scanning the occupants of the gallery through his opera glass. That's that, set of glasses on a stick that you can see through. Don't pay attention to him, Dorian, said the painter. I understand what you mean, and I believe in this girl. Anyone you love must be marvelous, and any girl that has the effect you describe must be fine and noble. To spiritualize one's age, that is something worth doing. If this girl can give a soul to those who have lived without one, if she can create a sense of beauty in people whose lives have been sordid and ugly, if she can strip them of their selfishness and lend them tears for sorrows that are not their own, she is worthy of all your adoration, worthy of the adoration of the world. Pause. couple of things here. We get this idea that first off, he's just so cheerful. He always sees the best in things. He says she's fine and noble. These are the qualities that Basil admires. It's not beauty; it's what's inside. We talk about souls. She gives a soul to those who don't have one. Very similar. Well, Lord Henry takes or gives his soul to Dorian. We talk about souls there too. Um, also. That she helps them cry for sorrows that are not their own. She makes them selfless instead of selfish. Lord Henry's whole philosophy of hedonism is a philosophy of selfishness. The whole goal is for somebody to live their own life fully and enjoy every moment of it. What did Lord Henry say? That conscience is a form of cowardice. So being selfish is courageous in his theory. Very different from Basil here. Anyway, this marriage is quite right. I did not think so at first, but I admit it now. The gods made Sybil Vane for you. Without her, you would have been incomplete. Thanks, Basil, answered Dorian Gray, pressing his hand. I knew that you would understand me. Harry is so cynical. He terrifies me. But here is the orchestra. It is quite dreadful, but it only lasts for about 5 minutes. Then the curtain rises, and you will see the girl to whom I am going to give all my life, to whom I have given everything that is good in me. A quarter of an hour afterward, amid extraordinary turmoil of applause, Sybil Vane stepped onto the stage. Yes, she was certainly lovely to look at. One of the loveliest creatures Lord Henry thought that he had ever seen. There was something of the fawn in her shy grace and startled eyes. A faint blush, like the shadow of a rose in a mirror of silver, came to her cheeks, and she glanced at the crowded, enthusiastic house. Something of the fawn about her? That's a Greek allusion as well.